Now this is interesting. I'm in my bedroom right now. Rather than show you the back of my wall, like I'll put up my little riffraff background. That's kind of weird looking. Look at my head, look at my wall. Yeah, do you want to say hi? No, Evelyn doesn't want to say hi. So somebody sent me this. You know, I had a dream. I've said it a bunch of times. I saw Illhan Omar, Minnesota representative, being arrested. I was part of the sting operation, and I was like dating her or like her boyfriend or something. And well, let's go back to your house and let's just hang out in the bedroom. And like, I had to keep her there until the feds or military came in. Again, the people I saw, I was like, God, there was a lady that came in. She was wearing a skirt, like a long skirt. Like, it just reminded me of like a military woman, not FBI. And, she's under arrest, and she's like looking at her like, you can get me out of this. We have power. And the lady's like, not anymore. You're on your own. And then she storms out of the room. I instantly get this knowledge. Hillary Clinton's in the next room. I wake up. I've said this a bunch of times. Now, I don't know if this is going to mean anything yet, but this is damn interesting. Now, this is from a site called Truth Tent. It has a little logo of a tent. Truthtent.com. So, 240 million in food aid stolen, 44 indicted in Minnesota. Now, I'm going to just type that headline in. And New York Times, 13 minutes ago, Justice Department charges 48 in brazen pandemic anti-fraud. And since that's the New York Times, it does say Minnesota. So this is accurate. Okay. So let's read something here, because this guy is saying some things that's writing the article, whose name is James Baker. The New York Times tells the story of the latest example of how Minnesotans got taken for a ride. The Justice Department said on Tuesday that a federal grand jury had indicted 44, now we know it's 48, people on charges that they ran a brazen fraud against anti-hunger programs during the coronavirus pandemic, stealing $240 million by billing the government for meals they did not serve to children who did not even exist. The case in Minnesota appears to be the largest fraud claim uncovered in any pandemic relief program, standing out even in a period when heavy federal spending and lax oversight allowed a spree of scams with few recent parallels. The Minnesota operation, prosecutors said, was especially bold. One accused conspirator told the government he had fed 5,000 children a day in a second-story apartment. That's the end of the article that he quoted. So back to his article, the guy writing this. My friend Bill Glenn has been doing yeoman's work for over a year, exposing the massive fraud being committed in our state by pretend do-gooders. And that fraud extends far beyond and goes back much farther than this one example. Now, he's going to make some claims here in the next part of this that I can't say for sure or true or not, so this is just hearsay at this point, okay? The fraudsters involved in this one case have deep ties to Democrat politicians here in Minnesota, most notably, we should watch let me start watching the Austin Powers series again, like first one, second one, third one. That'd be fun. Remember that's the sound from Austin Powers. Illhan Omar, the radical squad member, congresswoman representing Minneapolis, and unfortunately my representative, he says, and because the accused were politically connected, they could be as brazen as they wanted to without fear that anyone in power in Minnesota would go after them. Now he bolds the next part, so I think this might be back to the New York Times article. Other defendants in the case seemed to put minimal effort into disguising what they were doing, using the website listofrandomnames.com to create a fake list of children they could charge for feeding. Others used a number-generating program to produce ages for the children they were supposedly feeding, which led the ages to fluctuate wildly each time the group updated its list of those non-existent children, court papers said. But their scheme, details of which were reported in the New York Times in March, still pulled in millions of dollars per week, prosecutors said in court papers, because government officials had relaxed oversight of the feeding program during the pandemic and because the accused fraudsters had help from a trusted insider. That insider was Amy, spelled A-I-M-E-E, Bock, B-O-C-K, the founder of a nonprofit group, Feeding Our Future, that the state of Minnesota relied on as a watchdog to stop fraud at feeding sites. But Ms. Bock did the opposites, the indictments say. When pandemic relief programs, this is New York Times, when pandemic relief programs flooded the programs with money, she exploited her position to bring in nearly 200 new feeding operations she knew were submitting fake or inflated invoices. And by the way, I'll just say it now, in case you're getting tired of me reading this. We already see what the deep state does, in mostly Democrats, unfortunately, deep state Dems. Funding, Ukraine, billions, USA, billions, we don't know where it's going, there's no tracking it, and somehow it makes its way back to our shores to help fund politicians and their political, rotten, fraud careers. I'm just going to throw a dart and guess that there might be a teeny tiny chance, not saying it was, but maybe a sliver of a chance that this money was being funneled back to certain high-level politicians like, you know who. I just mentioned it. I mean, again, just a guess. I can't prove this. The Federal Child and Adult Program, Care Program and the Summer Food Service Program are used to feed children and adults in daycare and after-school organizations. Together, they spend $4 billion a year to feed people across the country. Feeding Our Future receives hundreds of millions of dollars from these two federal programs from 2019 through 2021. So we're talking $4 billion into that program? How much of that actually went to where it was supposed to go? I'm just going to throw that out there. You can only imagine. Feeding Our Future received hundreds of millions of dollars in 2019, 2021, okay, and passed the money down to hundreds of mostly immigrant-run nonprofits across the state, according to records from the Minnesota Department of Education. The process was supposed to work like this. Every month, Feeding Our Future supplied the Minnesota Department of Education with reports on the number of meals their contractor served. The Department of Education then sent the meal counts to the federal government for compensation. Feeding Our Future would then pass the federal government money down to its contractors, which were religious institutions, nonprofits, and other groups that were supposed to use the money to feed children. During the pandemic, when schools and their free meals were shut down, these reimbursements amounted to millions of dollars each month. Feeding Our Future received $3.4 million in federal food aid money in 2019, $43 million in 2020, and $198 million in 2021. So this guy comes back on and says, Minnesotans love giving money to causes with names like Feeding Our Future. It has a nice ring to it, after all. The fraud itself is the sexy part of that gets people's attention. When $250 million gets stolen, of course it does. But the much more troubling thing is that the Minnesota Department of Education is the agency that administered the program. And somehow nobody there cared to do anything about the fraud until the feds got involved to investigate. And the feds got involved to investigate because some whistleblowers in the immigrant community worked with some rebellious Republican legislators to expose the fraud. So I ask you, if these insiders worked with Republican legislators to expose the fraud, do you really think my little crazy far out there sliver or percentage that it might be possible Democrats funneling money to themselves essentially might possibly be true? Like there might be a sliver of chance again that that's true. So the name Illhan Omar has come up in this. And somebody decided this. Joe, didn't you have a dream on that? Yes, I did. Yes, I did. And I wonder if we're getting close. And maybe it's time to say goodbye to Illhan and her ilk. So we'll see. Just again, interesting thing to see just happen. This is happened. This is today posted. So do all roads lead to Rome? Do all roads lead to deep state Democrats? All corrupt roads? Well, maybe most. And we know there's some dirty Republicans out there too. But stay tuned.